3.
Okay, good. I'd just like to welcome you on behalf of the Simcoe County Historical Association to our speaker series. I'm looking forward to hearing this. Now, Donna's been talking about this, and it's got to be good if Donna's bringing it up and putting it forward. So thank you for bringing everybody on board, Donna. But I'd like to welcome you all over. The farthest person so far is from Edmonton. And do we have any other people from outside of Ontario? No? How about outside of Simcoe County? Wave your hand. We've got a few. That's good. Well,
how about the oldest?
And,
how about the oldest?
Oh, okay. Who's the oldest? Do I start counting back by tens?
Janice.
From 100?
Janice, wave.
Oh, she's muted.
You're muted, Janice, which we ordered you to do, and you did it.
How dare she?
Anyway, that's Janice Laking, the oldest member that I know about.
That's great. Thanks for everyone for coming, and I'll turn it over to you, Donna. Are you going to introduce the speakers?
Well, since neither of them sent me anything in print, I'm going to fake it.
Because we're
and
retired.
they're going to be sorry. They're going to be sorry. About a year ago, precisely to this day, we had these two all set to go at Knox School in Innisfil. And of course, we all know about COVID and what it has interfered with. And sure enough, it hit these two people, and a very big group, I understood, was coming. So it's a wonderful thing we can get together like this. It's unique. I imagine they've never done it as a duo before, ever. So to do it tonight will really be something. Now, the little bit I know about Ian is that he's not wearing pants tonight. He has a very flighty memory. I don't know what that means. It could mean that he fakes what he doesn't know, or he jumps from topic to topic. I'm not sure. Miriam, I know much better than that. Of course, she's a beloved Innisfil girl. That already puts her up top notch. She also has so faithfully recorded the goings on of Innisfil Historical, and you know what, even now continues to do so. And that jerk McInroy, pardon me for getting off here, he set me up for an interview not too long ago, and the one word I never would have used, calling Barry vultures, I used that word, and he put it in the article. So there you go.
But I didn't attribute it to you.
That's true. Okay.
That
Anyway, McInroy and King, or is it King and McInroy? Away you go. Is it ladies first?
Ladies first.
Thank you. Thank you. So I was just going to explain a bit more about my backdoor entry into journalism. Back in 1984, you didn't need a degree in journalism to start working for a newspaper. You just had to be able to write, be able to ask questions, and meet an editor, and they were everywhere. There were so many small community papers at the time that if you wanted to write, it was possible to find somebody who would actually take your work. So in 1984, there I was with a Bachelor of Science degree in geography, a Master's of Science in biogeography, 2 small children, no car, in Cookstown. And fortunately, there was a little paper called the Cookstown Advocate. And it was really special. It came out monthly, not even a weekly, it was a monthly. It had a focus on the community of Cookstown. And the editor, Gary Bissinger, was the first person in Ontario to publish by desktop publishing. So he used a computer to put together the Advocate. And this was the first time this had ever been done in all of Ontario. And that meant nothing to me because I would write my stories in longhand, type them up on an Underwood typewriter, and hand in my copy. And I went from doing children's science columns on bats and snakes and spiders to doing an entire page of children's stuff with original stories and jokes and crafts. And it wasn't until he sold the paper to Mary Ellen Van Holle that I suddenly started covering other things like real news. And that was not an easy transition because I had no background. The first hard news story I did was on the Cookstown sewage treatment plant, brand new thing, exciting topic. It was so long and so rambling and so unfocused. I've never met anybody who actually read the entire thing, but that was where I was at. It took a little while for me to basically learn my craft on the job. I went from the Cookstown Advocate to the Bradford Gazette Weekly, which was run by Donna Purkis. And when that folded in 1990, 1991, I actually, by that time, had enough background to actually be able to write. And I became a founding mother of the Bradford Times. Now, this is a completely different story from Ian's half. Go, Ian, your turn.
I don't know if it's that different.
Bit.
I was what they call a two-way guy, photographer and reporter. I learned my photography before I went to journalism school, which was at the suggestion of my mother. And I went to the Georgian College program, 84, 85, 85, 86, after a decade or so out west being busy. And then I went to a 3-week work term in Newmarket at the Independent News. It lasted almost 7 years. That paper went through a few changes, and the industry did too. Going to pagination and things more computer-wise. And then I started to sneak in the door at the Examiner. Some of the folks out there might remember a paper called the Huronia Sunday back in the mid-90s. Worked on that, and then eventually until November 27, 2017, I worked at the Examiner. Geez, Miriam, my history seems a bit shorter than yours.
Well, I've sort of left out a bit.
Yeah.
You know.
I remember meeting Miriam. Miriam, I remember meeting you in 1991. I was still working in Newmarket.
We actually met before then. We ended up covering Innisfil Council before then, I believe. We were both in a meeting. It was something that I had been asked to cover. And I was so impressed with the way that you came in there. You had already read the agenda. You knew which story you wanted to write about. You left when it wasn't your story, came back for your story, and left after it. So
Yeah.
you were so focused. It was really, really quite something.
Well, those politicians, they talk too much.
Yeah.
Well, there might be some
Yes.
here. Sorry.
Oops. Yes. Yeah. So back in the 90s, there were really so many changes. It wasn't until the 90s that I got back into the desktop publishing kind of thing, right? Because there I was 84, 85, 86, working for a company that did their paper through desktop publishing, didn't touch me at all. And it wasn't until the 90s that they brought in basically a more advanced form of desktop publishing. And that's what the Bradford, until then, we were doing things like typing it up on typesetting machines or on computers, printing off the stories. Then you would cut it into columns based on
Right.
your column width.
It'd be typeset into those long columns.
Yep, long columns. You would cut it, then you would run it through the waxer, hopefully waxing the plain side rather than the type side.
Good for you, Miriam.
Yeah. There were times. And then you would basically have a sheet of paper that you, like light cardboard, that you would mock the paper up on, and you would have to roll it on, hoping that the wax would actually stick and not pop off. You know, we actually did have occasions when articles would come apart before they were photographed. Then you would take it to the press and they would photograph the entire page and they would put it through the presses, and there you were, there was your paper.
A little more hands-on than now, certainly.
Well, I remember putting the pages in a box and rushing to make press deadline, either down in Newmarket or up in Barrie. So, 2 o'clock in the morning, having completed the paper, have to be there by 2:30 because that's deadline if you want the paper to be out on time. And we had episodes.
At one point, the little Newmarket paper was printed at Central Ontario Web in Elmville. So I had to run the
Wow.
flats up there.
Holy smokes, that's
Well, it's
worse.
not far from my house, really, in Thornton. It was, yeah, it was far from my house, but yeah, dropping off the flats at midnight, etc. Yeah, so I'm not sure how much about the past we want to talk about. Donna, what are we going to do here? Have to unmute.
For me, a topic, and I know you're itching to talk about it anyway.
Oh.
Both of you. As the article read, something like, no more newspapers in Simcoe County. I mean, I cried. I assume one or both of you cried. I thought, where am I going to get my history from? My news for the current history. And that was a tragic day. How many years ago?
November
3?
27th, 2017.
Correct.
Whoa.
Yep.
Well, who wants to talk about that first?
Ian, why don't you tell them what happened to you on November 27th?
Well, I had a call from my editor that morning saying, the inevitable. Just let me know before I came in. We were fortunate that we had a Staples next door there at the Barrie office, because the Post Media types were kind enough to bring us a bunch of empty boxes that we could put our stuff in. That was really nice. And a very nice fellow there gave us some things to sign or some things to take to an attorney if we wanted to, whatever, but that's fine. It was actually kind of half relief, half pissed off, half when can we start drinking type thing. We weren't surprised. We didn't know more than a lot of people, but it didn't seem to be that big a surprise. They were kind of sneaky. I think an article I forwarded to you, Donna, mentioned some things. There's a few things I'm not allowed to talk about, but if you get a box full of business cards in a daytimer in October, you sort of expect things are going to carry on for a while, but that wasn't the case.
Yeah, we were a little suspicious that they were going to close us because they did not renew our lease. So we knew that on January 1st, something was going to happen because we had no place to go. We had actually run around for a while trying to find them cheaper places to rent, closets in other people's offices, things like that, anything that would do. Did not get any feedback. So on the the 27th, it was budget day in Bradford. And I had my little notebook and my camera and was down in the library, the Bradford Library, listening to budget, and I get a call. And for once I hadn't turned my phone off, so I did pick up, and it was the office saying, "You've got to come back now." And I said, "No, because I'm in the middle of a budget meeting and I can't leave now." And they said, "Oh, yes, you can. And you need to be back here now." I got back there. There was somebody from Post Media who said, "Okay, this is it. Pack up and go. And here are the boxes. Leave everything that belongs to the paper, and you must be out by 11 o'clock." We didn't cry, but the poor woman that they sent down from Post Media was in tears. She was just weeping. She felt terrible. We ended up comforting her because she was so upset. The really sad thing about all of this was if I wasn't thinking, and if I'd been thinking, I would have taken some things. And
Miriam, I'm disappointed.
I was so good. I left everything that belonged to the paper there. And I've regretted it ever since because I had binders full of photo CDs that I had put together for the library. And they never made it to the library. And that was
The only thing I left there was a 6-inch thick Webster's dictionary that my mom had given me. I used it to prop up my monitor, and
I remember that.
it
Yep.
went for a walk. I don't know where it went. But other than that, Donna, I don't know if you want us to wax eloquent about things that
Well,
it's just corporate crap to me.
I think I think I miss the photos, Miriam, as much as you do, because I was building a new whole section of our Historical Society website around your photos. Presuming you would be giving them to me, or
Yes.
us, I should say, the royal us, the royal we. I believe there are people here with questions. And if the topic hasn't been covered yet, I'd be pleased to invite you. Now, for the person who's on the telephone, who is that?
It's Richard Blanchard from Angus.
Oh, Richard, a newspaper man himself formerly.
Yes, sir.
Sometimes.
Sometimes. He said. Would you have any questions before? Because that's a good looking.
Not right now.
No, okay. If you have anything. Anyone else, raise your hand or just jump in. Ted Duncan, Ted the Prez. Okay.
I would like to know, I know in Aurelia, the Packet and Times has been not scanned, but the library has copies of going into the past. Now, the newspapers that you belong to and so on, were past copies kept by someone?
Yes. Bradford Times, which had a 26-year history from 1991 to 2017. We sent copies up to the archive and also to the Bradford Library. And they've got some on microfiche and some actual copies. Some of them are posted. Some of the back issues are posted online by Metroland because what happened on November 27th was that Torstar and Post Media Group traded papers. So they 22 community papers and 2 free dailies that Torstar put out were basically given to Post Media. Post Media gave, how many community papers was that? That was 15 community.
I can't remember.
Free dailies the other way, and then they closed them all except for one. They just, it basically cleared out the competition because things were getting pretty intense in terms of those advertising dollars. What with online, the rising costs of distribution, there was a feeling, obviously, that if they could only get rid of some of that competition and become the only game in town, it would be a much better financial scenario for the surviving papers. And yeah,
Ted, I'm not sure if this answers your question, Ted, but if you Google some of my old articles at the Examiner, it comes up under simcoe.com, which is the Metroland Tour Star,
yeah.
and it still has my name, but now my photo credits change. It says Ian McInroy Tour Star photo, which is so cool. I didn't know I never used to work for them, but anyways, that's where the content is if you want to get it online. But yeah, we used to send our papers to the Perry Public Library, I think. I don't think they went to the archive. I'm not positive.
Some Berry
is that what you're
Examiner on
asking?
microfiche, but
Well, they don't do microfiche anymore, but
no,
well, they
no.
still have microfiche. But
Yeah.
does that answer your question, Ted?
I think so. It was a concern of mine. I was a loyal reader of the Toronto Star for a long time. And I was so angry that I took my subscription and threw it back at them and said I didn't want it anymore.
Good for you.
I was really upset. I think they were very, I don't know, it just, they didn't do it right, didn't do it properly. They didn't give people a chance to maybe change things or bring something else into into place. But it was very frustrating for me. And I'm a loyal reader. I used to read 2 or 3 papers a day, and I had to suffer from withdrawal for a while. And I still can't read papers online very well. I just don't enjoy it. I need I need paper in my hands, and I need to smell the newsprint. But it's not like it was, and I think we've lost a lot of local. In Aurelia, for example, we have a weekly and we have Aurelia Matters online. But to me, all the local stuff, like who won the ball game or the soccer game, and who was visiting for church or something like that from out of town, or all those things that were so important to small communities is completely lost now. We have no way of recapturing that, and I find that terrible. Anyway, I better stop talking. Let somebody else talk.
Maybe just a tiny positive note, though. Maybe there is still a way to do that. I don't really like reading news on screens either. So we can kind of probably kiss off the paper version. Excuse me. But I think there's still a way to be personable and reflective of a community still online. It doesn't have to be in print. I don't know if it's exactly being done the way everybody wants it to be done online, but I think it can happen.
I'd like to say something though, because newspapers had editors and had some kind of integrity, and I felt you could trust their word on stories and opinions. And online, I find that that's not always possible.
Well, Village Media Group, which is the online group that owns Barrie Today, Aurelia Matters, Bradford Today, Innisfil Today, Collingwood, I don't know how many they have right now. They have a strong editorial policy.
They do.
They try to follow all the rules that we used to follow in print. It's online. And the problem with that is we don't cover a lot of the stuff the same stuff. I mean, like we used to try to make the Bradford Times this little gift to the community. So we would have the sports section and we would have what was happening in the churches. And a lot of that is sort of seen as not having a big audience. So it's really not covered. But we still, it still covers the council meetings, personal achievement, business stories, things like that. And I think if you wanted some of these other things to be covered as well, the best thing to do is actually to contact the online papers and say, look, you know, we would love you to actually do a
Mm.
repeated section on this particular topic. And I think that's the way to help rebuild that connection between
Very
the,
good, very good. Steve has a question. Is it Steve or Stephen?
Usually Stephen. Thank you very much, Donna. So I happen to be one who loves newspapers, but used to be allergic to either the ink or the fibers or something. I'd sneeze, and every time I read it, but that I was sneezing all the time because I was always reading newspapers. With the move to digital, I found a couple of things, but I wanted to sort of express an opinion and ask a question. First of all, I feel like local digital news is not getting the same wide distribution that the newspapers got. The advantage that I see for digital format of news casting is the fact that it's more immediate, because let's talk about Aurelia, which is the closest community to me that had an ongoing newspaper up until relatively recently. That was basically a weekly distribution. So news, as it happens, which is accelerating every day, especially with things like the pandemic and daily announcements and that sort of thing. News in a print format wasn't news anymore near the end, not compared to digital. Digital, everything I read in the newspaper, I'd already heard or seen, if you like, online. But what I feel is missing with the move to digital, and perhaps somebody can correct me and tell me this isn't the case, but it feels as though the stories are being written differently. They're being written in consideration of the short attention span that ostensibly the digital reader has. Well, I have to say, I did teach a little bit of this at Lakehead University, so I have opinions, but they may not be correct. So the depth of detail, the amount of research that used to be in the articles that I found in the newspaper, the better ones, feels like it's missing to me in the digital environment. It's just a headline, not always completely related perfectly to the story, but to grab my attention among so many other stories. And then off we go into a very light treatment of the subject, usually or often. And I feel that there's a depth missing, certainly the kind of depth that a really good newspaper person would write. And I say that even knowing that in Aurelia, as an example, the fellow who was editor, Nathan Taylor, who was editing the Packet and Times, did transition to be part of one of the digital providers. But I noticed that his work is shorter. So the questions are, is my perception right that digital news is being written differently? Is there a source I'm missing for depth of coverage? And do people agree with me on the immediacy of digital, which is wonderful? I hear it so quickly, and that's an advantage. Does anybody agree or disagree or have color to add to what I've said?
Any responses to Stephen? He's throwing it out there.
well, it's,
Wow.
yeah, it's a different type of writing. I've noticed that as well. I've been corrected when I write some of my stories. This whole thing of like one sentence equals one paragraph is a little harsh. But you know, every writer is different. I try to do the same level of work, and I know Ian does too, the same level of research and background. And I've been told it's not they don't really necessarily want it short. It's just, they want so much, right? It's this constant news cycle where your story is up and then it's within an hour, there's something else that's that's posted. And it's not necessarily, you know, the other thing that comes in isn't necessarily 100% local. Maybe it's from a surrounding community. So, you know, it is a different animal. It is a different animal.
I guess I would say, whether you're writing it online or in the old days on print, a good story should be written the same way. I'm not sure
Yeah.
what Stephen was looking at there, whatever. But you're right, it is. Well, back in the day, we in print, I think we were supposed to dummy it down so that somebody in grade 3 or grade 5 could read it.
I thought it was 7.
Um,
No?
I think the examiner readers were university educated, from what I remember. So we had to be very careful what we wrote. Oh, there's Janice. But you might want to check some other sites too, because not everybody maybe glances over things, if that's what you're thinking. I don't think people write them necessarily shorter though.
How about spelling mistakes?
Oh,
How? Now I'm manic about, because I was always a good speller. I can pick out spelling mistakes everywhere. Once in a while I produce one myself, but that's more the computer's problem than mine, of course. What do you do about them?
well, you
Don't
can,
make them.
when you're online, you can actually go back and correct it if somebody lets you know, or if you catch it. It used
Okay.
First, when you were doing it in print, and when you had your spelling mistake in print, there it was for all time, for all to see, forever.
Yeah, I
But-
totally agree with that. The beauty of online is you can make those changes if there's corrections or typos, or you need to add something or delete something. It's wonderful. And particularly with Barry today, they're so responsive. If you do have to make a change, it's, I really like the digital environment, and everything's at your fingertips. So just my opinion.
That's a good one, Deb. That's a good one. I call myself the Ross Wallace of Innisfil apprentice. And Ross Wallace wrote letters by the hordes to every country, every person who ever contacted him. It was a handwritten letter. And as perfect as it could be. Like when I paused to speak, that's the way he wrote. He paused to write, to reflect, to say everything truthfully and straightforward. And I would not have said I'd ever found a spelling mistake in his writing. It was a talent, you know, a real talent. Anyway, I learned from him a lot of writing techniques, let's say, the honesty in it, the wording of things, and so on. So if I sound antique when I'm only in my early 70s, it's only the way I was trained. I'm resting on that right now.
Good spelling never goes out of fashion.
There's John Trotter with his hand up.
Oh my God.
John Trotter's muted though. There we go.
Yes, well, that's me. I'm always muted. I'd like to ask the two stars tonight whether they see any irony in the fact that their entire profession is a subject of the Historical Society.
Makes sense to me because it's
Continue.
oh, I was going to say, well, we are obsolete now, so it is bound to go on a dusty shelf somewhere. Hello, John.
The most,
I wanted to hear from Miriam as well, both of you.
Absolutely. We actually struggled. We knew things would have to change before the big shutdown and closures. And we actually, as an office, sat down and did a brainstorming session of how we could try to make a paper product still relevant in a digital age. And it was not a terribly successful exercise. We had some ideas of augmented reality, where basically trying to create a link between the paper product and the online product through the use of those little, I don't know what they're called.
USBs or?
Things. Yeah, the little codes that you can read with your phone.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
Yeah,
of course.
so we actually looked at that, and we looked at how about some kind of club where if you subscribed, you'd get special deals. I mean, we looked at ways to try to evolve a newspaper product, and a newspaper product is still, it's newsprint is just newsprint, and we could not find a way to really bring that into this new world. So, you know, I think if people want newsprint, they can bring it back. They can do it. There's nothing to stop somebody from starting a paper like the Cookstown Advocate and doing it desktop, producing an actual paper product. It's a matter of will. It's a matter of would it be economically viable? I think it would have to be supported by those who loved it. And other than that, I think we are a bit of a dinosaur. We've actually adapted, Ian and I. We work for the online.
I agree.
But
Something interesting happened. Former Mayor Brian Jackson's mother was his biggest supporter. And when he entered politics, she began cutting out any article in every paper she got her hands on that had to do with Innisfil and particularly with Brian. And Brian handed me over these boxes of clippings. Well, I'm not ready to give them away to others yet because it is so fascinating. Like, it is truly the unfolding of Innisfil history for 24 years. I mean, I'd lend them to you too if you wanted them sometime. It's fascinating. I have a comment here from Anthony to everyone, and he's defending the position of certain newspapers, and I agree with this. Certain newspapers still carry in-depth articles. My experience is it is in the larger newspapers, and that's probably exactly so. Now, is there anyone else with a question? I don't want any stone to go unturned. Any?
Donna?
Yes.
I was just going to say something to John. John, were you asking about how we were transitioning before the papers closed, how we were dealing with the internet? Is that what you asked?
No, that's not what I was asking.
I was just going to say, when we were edging towards the end, there was a way you could write a longer version of your story that went online, but they would have and then you'd mention that at the end of the story that was going into print. I don't know if that makes any sense, but people would sort of get the inverted pyramid idea of the story, and if they wanted more detail about it, they could go to the online version. And then we used to be able to write our faces off and have as much as we want, even have sidebar stories and stuff. But to get the print edition out to deadline and everything was all kind of folded into place. I may have just answered a question that nobody asked. Though.
No, that's good. That's good. Steve, your hand is still up. Stephen, your hand is still up in the air on my, so I didn't know whether you're done. Okay. You're done. Okay.
It's not that I'm done. I have more questions, but I see that there are quite a few other hands up, like Bert, for example, so I'm not
is
going to.
Bert's hand up? Okay, so you can
There are
see
other hands up. I can wait.
Bert, a
I'm
question.
done. Yes. Well, as Miriam knows, she's done an outstanding, well, I know she's done an outstanding job over the past years of following all the local stuff that went on, especially my dad's auctions and stuff like that. And you've written amazing articles. That truly is going to be missed in hard copy, I feel. What I do have a question is because Nikki and I are still into antique collecting and cleaning out old houses, we have acquired some old newspapers and some prints. So that's, that's going to be hard to find. That's going to be missed. And you know what? I know my parents look forward to the newspaper coming to the end of their driveway, or, finding a box of china from the 50s and the 60s that still had, china wrapped from a Bradford newspaper in it, that I think it took us more time to wrap stuff like that because we were reading articles from, 40, 50 years ago. So I think the digital age is clustered. I find in the Bradford Today, I do subscribe to it. I do get emails or stuff, notifications on certain articles, but to have a hard copy in your hand and to be able to cut it out and save it in a book, that's gone. So it's hard to print something from Bradford Today and then purposely put it into a binder to save for, years to come, unless it pertains to, my dad or something that affected that person. But like you said, Don, a lot of people did collect stuff from their family that were involved in the community into a scrapbook to keep for generations. That digital age, that is gone. So it's unfortunate.
It's a sign of the times, of course. Well, I was thinking maybe we got a little bored with reading about Aunt Minnie visited cousin Doolittle and so on and so on. But in fact, as Ted misses it. So, he's got a sheltered life though. That's the thing. He's hardly ever out. And
we're creatures of habit. And if you got the paper at the end of your driveway, you knew on page 1 was the main news. Page 2 had the sports. 3 or 4 had, your classified. So to navigate the Bradford Today or any other website, you have to click on to get where you're going. At least you knew in the pages that, after 20 years of getting the same paper, you knew right away.
Very good point. Yeah. I have a question for Janice. Janice, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Well, I'm sorry to identify you as perhaps the oldest person with us tonight, but on the other hand, we're delighted to have you.
Thank you.
And you've likely been receiving newspapers the longest of any of us here.
That's right.
What do you miss about the newspaper?
I think that politics has lost their strongest ally and critic at the same time. I think that we used to get lots of opinions discussed that I don't think get discussed anymore. It's just I really think that our life in politics, and that's not just Barrie and Simcoe County, and it's Canada, has lost a very strong voice when they have lost their newspapers.
Yeah, I can't disagree. And I see Barb Bagley is anxiously waiting.
I'm
Barb?
patiently waiting, Donna.
Not anxious?
I know both. No.
Okay.
Patiently.
Okay.
I certainly have talked to both Miriam and Ian in the course of the years. I have to tell you though that some of my best memories were I learned to read a lot to my grandfather who lost his sight. And when we went to visit him, our job was to read the newspaper to him. And I still remember that If I couldn't figure out what the word was, I could spell it to him and he would teach me the word that I couldn't read. And it was an education, and it was a way to pass time for my grandfather, and he rather enjoyed it, or said he did. But we got 2 newspapers at our house, 2 dailies at our house when I was growing up. And so we read it, and it was a tool my mother used to teach my brother about money, because the stock prices were in fractions. And so she taught him about money with that. And to this day, I can see him sitting by my dad and my mom, learning how much his pretend money had made or lost in the stock market that day. And it taught him English. And in fact, it is something we miss in our house, to hold a newspaper. There's nothing quite like it. And the last things I did for my dad when he was living with me, when he tried to fake that he could still read the newspaper, but his eyes were failing, I offered sometimes, "Oh, Dad, did you see this on the paper?" And I would read it to him, because I knew he couldn't read it himself anymore. And so those are the kinds of things that are way bigger than the newspaper going out of print for money. It's all those things that, to me, the newspaper means. And I think of the children who won't learn about money because they don't see the fractions that are money in a company, or aren't able to sit and read with their grandparents or their parents the news of the day, because it's not the same to read it in its truncated version so many times online. So I think the service that has been given to our community by all the newspaper men and women is incredible. And when you think about wartime and hearing about things and all those long years ago, how would families have ever known what was happening? And I just think, I say thank you for the service you give us and continue to give us. It's not the same as holding a newspaper, but for heaven's sakes, it's still news and we all love it. So I just want to say thank you for the hours and hours and hours you put in writing those articles and telling the people about what's happening in our world.
Well said, Barb. Well said.
Thanks, Barb.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else? I think Stephen, did you have a hand up? Richard Blanchard, your
Not just me, there are others, but if you've noticed me, I want to second what Barb was saying, and certainly point out that much of what Barb was talking about is actually nostalgia. It's the sentimental aspect related to something which we had that is now gone. And I think that's mainly community newspapers, because every time I visit my father with dementia in Toronto, reminded me of what you were saying, Barb, and his ability to see at 88 and so on and so forth. He still gets the Toronto Star. He still gets those Toronto newspapers and reads them in depth. It's in part nostalgia, and I see great value in heritage and history and the nostalgia feelings that are aligned to all of that. What I can say though is that's the only way we had to get news. I mean, it was the radio at first, newspapers, and then ultimately television after radio. We had ways of learning about the rest of the world, whether it's stock prices or war and how it's going on. And all of that still exists. So that credit to people like the 2 newspaper people and anybody else that's been affiliated with media who's on this call as well, that credit has to go out in a continued way. Thanks for telling us the stories that we need to know about the rest of the world. Now it's digital. I mean, it's digital. That's the way it is. And actually there are tremendous benefits to digital. I can instantly, you tell me a word or a name or a story, or I want to find that information, and I can find that information in about a half a second now on almost any topic I want. And that's added enormous value during the pandemic, because we're not able to get around the way we were before. We need information to come to us, and this new digital format really does that. But one day we're going to be nostalgic for sitting around our laptops and sharing stories. It doesn't have the same feel to it. But I regardless, the news goes on, and so news reporting goes on.
Well, thank you for that. Yes, I see
Steve.
another Steve.
Hi. Hope
Hi.
you can hear me okay.
Yes.
My name is Steve Glover. I'm the branch historian for the Barrie Legion and do some stuff. I moved to Barrie in 1992 and I got interested in the history of the Great and Simcoe Foresters and other things like that. And so over time, I was relying on the Barrie Examiner and the Aurelia newspapers to learn about history. And now I know, as Ian has pointed out, that those newspapers after 2017 won't be typically online. I'll have to learn it through other sources. My 26-year-old son doesn't listen to CBC, doesn't pick up the Globe and Mail, but he gets all that he wants from his social media. And when I talk about what's going on in the world, he's got a whole different source of material that the new kids on the block are going to. I look a lot around the room here, and I think that every one of us have a lament for newspapers, and they have found a new way to get what I guess they need. And I would say that, it's just, again, our sign of the times. I want to buy a song that I hear on radio by going to a record shop. Can't do that. I'm forced to go online. I don't want to. That's my comment.
Okay, that's great, Steve. Okay, there's Bert with a question. Yes, Bert.
Miriam, here's a little story that Mom just sold her place last couple of weeks. And last year, she had a contractor come and fix the roof on the back kitchen. You know the place really well. So then I showed up at her place, and I don't know if you can see this. This was in the roof of her building, and it's a Globe and Mail, and it's 1937. So the
Wow.
last time the roof was fixed or that back room was put on Mom and Dad's place was 1937. So here's a prime example of a survivor. And I probably got 4 or 5 other copies here that it's not Bradford or Innisfil, but there's something that survived. Well, look how many years, 80 years in a roof of my parents. So there's a nice little story there if you want something to add to.
And we actually should say that there are a few newspaper products still around. I mean, talking as if everything is gone, but the Globe and Mail is still publishing at the moment. Toronto Star, the Journal, the Innisfil Journal. So there are a handful. If you want to keep them, support them any way you can, because otherwise they'll be gone too. So.
Yeah.
Miriam, I noticed that in each of the online papers, and I do get 4 different ones, that they're now asking for money to buy an annual membership or a monthly. Has anyone else noticed that? Yes, I see some nods.
Yep.
I noticed and it's something like $80 some for the Barrie Today, Innisfil Today, Bradford Today a year. And then I think the Simcoe.com is, or Simcoe. Simcoe is 90 something a year. So I kind of feel that's good value now. I don't have so many other options. And do you want to comment on that, either of you?
Well, I'm glad you found a source you're comfortable with. There are 4 of them. I think you mentioned you have 4 different newspapers online, Donna.
Yes. The thing is,
you and I talked about this the other day. I think if you're comfortable with them, people should always be leery, I think, of where they get their news. Maybe leery is not the right word. They should question its integrity, whether it's online or whether it was in print.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. There's just so much slop on the internet. like Miriam said as well, there's good sites and there's some questionable ones. So we just have to be very wary, I think.
Would you care to recommend? Sometimes I get such an urge to have a newspaper in my hands. I'm considering subscribing to the Toronto Star or something that's dropped off. What do you folks think about the Toronto Star? Would it satisfy my historical urges, or?
We always assumed that people got the Toronto Star or the Globe and Mail or the Post. Our assumption with the Bradford Times was that that's where people were getting their national news or their Ontario news, which is why the Bradford Times really only focused on local stuff. We didn't cover the big issues or anything like that. We assumed you all were reading other newspapers or listening to the radio or the television,
Yeah.
or whatever, to get that big news, which is why, you know, we did the little stories. We did the
Well, CTV news.
yeah, they won, you know, it was that sort of thing. So yeah, you know, why not? Why
Yes,
not? If you love
yes.
yeah.
Well, and we start fires in our wood stove, and we're always looking for newspapers. So I kind of thought the Toronto
We
Star.
came up with 50 things you can do with newspaper that you couldn't do with digital stuff.
Well, I can tell everyone that Innisfil Historical has a newspaper file, and it was started when our document center started. So it is now nearly 50 years old. So we have some wonderful articles in our newspaper file of various topics, mainly Innisfil connected, but you know, local people, if they were married in Timbuktu, we have a photo of that, and it's great. Now, I think we've been chatting for over an hour. Are there other questions? I don't want to cut this short. If
There certainly are people with their hands still up, Donna. I don't know
Okay.
where they are on your view.
No, they're not on my
John and
view.
John and Barb both have their hands up at the moment.
All right, let's go with Barb.
That's kind. It was just careless computer use. I didn't take my.
And John?
Yeah, I'd like Miriam and Ian to talk a bit. They have transitioned to the new way, and I'd like them to talk a little bit about how they're enjoying it, whether they're going to keep going on it, what they see as being enjoyable or not enjoyable. Just general information about their current experience.
Go ahead, Miriam.
Well, okay.
Where do you want me to
Well,
go?
I'm sort of semi-retired, so I'm not doing a lot right now. I am mostly covering Innisfil Council and doing the odd story outside of that. What do I like about it? Well, I like the fact that people can access it so easily. One of the big frustrations with the Bradford Times used to be trying to get it delivered. Getting 10,000 or 11,000 copies of actual newspapers into people's hands was always a major challenge and a source of ulcers and frustration. Not to mention people threatening to sue because the paper ended up in their snowblower or hit the car window or whatever. So I love that immediacy. And I love the fact that if changes need to be made, we can actually make those changes. We can respond, and if there is an error, it doesn't have to wait until an entire week to put in a little correction box saying, "Oopsie, you know, got that wrong." We can do that online immediately, and let people know right away. Oh, this was a mistake. This is the correct information that we have backed up, and our apologies. So that's what I love about it. what I'm not crazy about is the fact that it's so impermanent that yeah, a story pops up, it's there, then it's gone. And if you want it, you have to go hunting through all these other stories that have come up. And then people are missing things that may be important, but they're missing them. The style, I have some issues with the style. This thing of one sentence equals one paragraph is a little unnerving at times, but for the most part, I'm pretty much enjoying it. I think it's great. Ian?
Well, in 2017, I was almost ready to retire anyway. So to answer your question, John, I'm just liking it fine. I still write a weekly column, I guess we call it, for Barrie Today. I like the online stuff. I don't have to see the inside of an office. I do all my work by phone. Of course, these days with COVID, I have to be a little creative with the photography, either doing some curbside, from across the street, or getting people to submit me photos. But even before 2017, I liked the online news thing. I was very wary, as I said, about where I used to get my information online. But certainly electronic or digital photography and everything is amazing, in the days of internet and all, immediate stuff. But I'd also agree with Miriam, once it's out in the world crazy web, it's there forever. It's almost the opposite of having a mistake forever in the printed edition. But yeah, once it's out there, it's really out there. So we have to get it right, I would say.
Absolutely.
So are both of you going to keep going?
Patty, do you have a hand up?
Yes, I am.
I'd like to, can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
I'd like to thank Ian and Miriam for all their work, because when I moved up here and involved in going to local events, community events, it was wonderful to see Miriam and Ian at these events, and then to see their articles in the local papers. Also where I worked at different places in Barrie, Ian would come to any special events that were going on in the nursing home or retirement home that I worked. They came for someone's 100th birthday, or they came for, it could be celebrating Canada Day. And, it's wonderful to see both of them at all these major events. It was just a pleasure to see them writing away, being there, and looking forward to seeing their articles in the papers. I want to thank you both. It's just something that I know I'm going to miss in all our community news. Thank you both.
A great thank you right there. Now we can all join in that sentiment. But are there, now, Stephen, I'm relying on you because somehow my
Marjorie has her hand up.
All right then, Marjorie. Speak, Marjorie.
She's muted. She's muted. By the way, I have a huge screen here. That's why I'm able to see everybody. It's
Well, I
really
thought I
awesome.
had a huge one, but it's not cutting it.
Okay.
Okay, I was just going to say, Miriam, Ian, I don't know you as well, but I have met Miriam at more dues and more functions and more things. I'll be looking for you now, Ian. And I really enjoy Barrie Today and Innisfil Today. And anytime I've ever phoned Miriam about anything that's going on in Sandy Cove, like a drive-by 100th birthday or something, she is right there taking a picture, and there's like 4 or 5 pictures in Innisfil Today, and anything with the Historical Society. I think we're very, very lucky to have 2 people that are community minded. And I'm happy that this is going on, Miriam, and I hope you don't retire totally. And Ian, I'm going to be really watching for you now. I didn't know you as well, sorry. But I applaud the 2 of them. They have done a wonderful job for Innisfil, especially, I think. And even Bradford. I love reading these silly little things that you put in a picture. I love reading that. I love those old newspapers about who wore what and who went on the honeymoon and all that stuff. I love it. Sorry, but well done.
Thank you.
I'd
Now,
just like
Richard
to,
Blanchard, your phone's lighting up. Is there something?
No,
Okay.
I'm okay.
Okay, then Ted.
listening to everybody, and I like what you're all saying, because I think it's something that I agree with. But one of the things that when I was young, I used to read all kinds of history, but it would always be about generals and kings and queens and so on. It'd be about the famous people, the rich people, all that sort of thing. And that's what I see in some cases, the big national newspapers now. They're dwelling on the national and on the big people, the big governments and that sort of thing. And I think what we're missing with local newspapers is the local stuff. We're missing the local history, which some people look on as being simple. But when you look back on it and you wanted to find out about what life was like at the time, that's where you went. You went to the newspapers. And that's why I like history. I like local history because I like to know how things, how people lived, how people did things, how people, that sort of thing. And the new digital ones, I subscribe to Barry Today and It Really Matters. And I send them a stipend every month because I want them to survive. But they can't do the same job as was done by the Ruya Packet and Times or the Barrie Examiner to bring the local life to us all and to actually record it so that people have scrapbooks, but you can go back in those newspapers and find all kinds of interesting things about the local people, not about the national. I don't really care about that. You can find that in a textbook, but the local stuff, it's in those newspapers. Anyway, enough for me.
That's a great viewpoint, Ted. And I was noticing as I was reading about them optimistically asking for money from we subscribers that that they're also asking about or making a plea for us to contribute stories. So they're actually asking for the stories, the photos that go with them. Now, then they'd probably follow up with an interview or something like that, a clarification. But I think we have to give them a bit of credit. I'm seeing that now. And, it used to be I just had to phone in or phone Miriam and take it away. They did, but there were some days, depending what all Miriam had been doing, but on a Saturdays were fairly frenzied for this little lady. And by the time she made the Innisfil Historical Society meeting at 2 p.m., or she might nip in at 2:15, but she'd love to stay for the whole meeting, but she would be looking just a tad frazzled. And she had the heaviest camera I have ever seen, the heaviest. And she'd drag her little self in and we'd find a chair for her because that was pretty critical. Usually in the center so she could take her photos in the center. Anyway, Miriam, you were heroic, really heroic.
And that's another thing too, because what it says is the local newspapers were there to promote local events, local organizations, local happenings. And we don't get that from national newspapers. And I think lots of community groups miss that. They miss how do they get their words out? How do they get their stories out? How do they get their activities out? We don't have it anymore.
Well, may I just put in a plug for Ian's weekly Rooted column, because if you like to read stories about people who have lived in the community for 25, 50, 75 years, he writes about that every week, and businesses that we grew up with. It's a wonderful column, and I think there's still a lot of community engagement with the Barrie Today team for sure. They're at every council meeting, and well, just check it out, read it cover to cover, as they say.
Now, I noticed, thanks, Deb. That's a
Thanks,
great
Deb.
viewpoint, and you're right.
Yeah.
I noticed, Joan LaBeouf, I don't believe you've said a word. Have you? You're on mute besides that, but. Okay, Helen, you've
Yes.
been attentive. You've been attentive. Would you care to add anything?
No, I'm listening. I've moved out of the area. I
Oh,
moved into the area 25, 30 years ago and found the local newspapers the absolute best way to know the communities. I did write for our historical society for 25 years. I actually enjoy reading my own writing. And I have a little story to tell you about what you write. It does matter. You got news right away if you said something that was incorrect, and people rarely complimented you, but they did in their own way because they said they enjoyed hearing about what we were doing, and I thought it was a wonderful way of communication. I find the internet cold. I find it factual, I guess, but there's no warmth to it. Miriam was a very hard worker. I recognize that. And I have to tell a little story because one day we had a speaker at our meeting. She was part of the Air Force, and she was so good that we invited her back. Now, the first time I wrote fairly accurately about her talk, what she represented and who she was. And then 3 years later, when she came to redo it, I thought I better check my facts. So where did I go? To the internet. And what did I find out? My article. Nobody else's, just mine. So if I was wrong the first time, I could be wrong the second time. And I thought, if that's the scope of the internet on this rather famous person, I think I'd rather stick with the paper. But I'm enjoying this because the Barrie Examiner or all those local papers I wasn't really into, but the Tottenham Times and the Beaton paper were my favorites. And that's all I have to say. I'm an observer now, not a participant in some ways.
Well, I just want to thank you so much. You were a wonderful contributor to the Bradford Times for many years. We loved your articles. They were very insightful and inspiring. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
This is a bit of a reunion here too, isn't it, Miriam and Ian? People you've worked with. So maybe all the people who've worked with Miriam in a newspaper sense or with Ian, would you put your hands up? I have the feeling there's 1, 2, 3, 4. I have, in many senses, 5. Very good, very good. 6, yes. So we know about them inside and out, don't we? Now, the rest, you're avid readers, I believe, and have various viewpoints about the newspaper. Now, Joan, did you have something to say, Joan LaBeouf?
Oh, just hello to everybody. This is the first time I've been on Zoom, but I do enjoy newspapers better.
Hello, Joan. Hello,
Hi,
Joan.
Ian. Nice to see you.
Nice to see your name. I can't see your face.
Oh, that's okay.
Are you a redhead now, Joan? Is it true?
No, it's kind of two-toned.
Oh, two-tone. Oh, I'm into two-tone. Yes.
Yeah.
Or
Isn't
4.
that to do with COVID?
No, no.
COVID two-tone?
Before we call it a night, I want to say this is our third Zoom, I believe. Our participation, our numbers have been the very highest for this one, so we're very thankful. Part of this we started in the hopes of growing our membership, and I believe that is happening. And our membership, I mean, I'm speaking for all the historical societies, not only Simcoe County, who's the sponsor of this, but all the local societies. You know, we just year after year putter along, gather a few stories, hit some really highlights, and carry on. And that's not just by luck, it's by people's hard work, obviously, and their love of history and their love of talking to people. So if you haven't picked up your copy of the Innisfil 2020 book, there's something to think about too. Ever the plug, you know. There, oh, look, there's John at the ready. John has those books at Trotter's Garage. Thank you, John. Put it down now. Okay. I guess another point is a couple of these stories have maybe featured more around Barrie and Innisfil, Bradford. We've had a good representation, but if there's other suggestions for meetings like this, we're happy to host. We're happy to include topics. Kathy Walton spoke about Barnes a month ago, and that was very, very well received too. So if there's something that appeals to you and we can offer it on a wider scale like this, we would be happy to do that.